Do you have difficulty asking for support from those that are closest to you? Learn to love yourself by sharing what others can do to support you. You'll discover how to ask for the support so that you can build trust that people in your life genuinely want what's best for you. How many of you have difficulty asking for support from those people you're close to? This has been a practice of mine this last year or two. April says yes, and I see a lot of raised hands. Whitney Lauritsen. Did I say that right, Whitney? All right, cool. We got a name right. Whitney Lauritsen is a podcast host, digital marketer, marketing advisor, and well-being coach. As an advocate for mindful living and mental health, Whitney launched the show, This Might Get Uncomfortable. I love that name. Her podcast episodes and online coaching sessions help people elevate their well-being to feel more joyful, vibrant, connected, and fulfilled. With mental health and emotional well-being the focus of her work in 2023, Whitney is here to speak about how being supportive and being supported can enrich your friendships and relationships. Yeah, let's give her some applause as she comes to the stage. I love this topic. That spotlight.
Can you hear that very slight audio in the background music? Nice. This is something I started doing in my coaching sessions, and mostly group coaching. I rarely do it in the one-on-one coaching, but in the group sessions, there's just something so peaceful about playing relaxing music in the background. And I'll explain how and why I'm going to use that today in a moment. But as mentioned, I'm going to talk about how to give and receive support with your friends specifically. I think what I talk about today can be applied to everyone in our lives, but it's designed specifically today to help you with your friendships, as we've been covering throughout. So speaking of things that we're going to cover, this is my quick overview so you know what to expect. I'm going to share a little bit about my journey with support. I'm going to have some interactive questions for you, which is completely optional. I'm going to talk about what makes a supportive friendship, how to offer support, how to receive support. I'm going to share with you something called the friendship audit, some resources. A lot of what I'm pulling from today come from books I've read. How many people here are big book readers? I can't see your faces right now, so if you want to put in the chat, I would love to know that, because I absolutely love reading. I read a ton of books specifically for today's talk, just to make sure I was thinking about support from a variety of perspectives. And at the very end, I'll share a place where you can find supportive friends, one place, a new place perhaps. So as mentioned, it is completely optional, but I'm going to take a little bit of a slower pace today because I'm a really big fan of interactive presentations. I feel like it keeps your attention. You'll be able to better understand what you're learning and process your thoughts in real time. And this can feel a little bit like a supportive conversation combined with what a coaching call can feel like. So I'm going to ask some questions for you to reflect on. You can write them down if you have a notebook, a journal, a piece of paper, and you can also share in the chat too. That's of course completely optional if you want to disclose this. It's really for you. And I can read some of them out loud if you put them in the chat as well, so we can all kind of learn from each other, and as you've been doing for the last few days. Okay, so I'm going to begin with my journey with support, and it's certainly been a journey. It's not complete. I'm not an expert in this. I don't even, similar to the word busy, which I also don't like to use. I can really relate to that statement before I started talking today. I'm so glad that was brought up. I think the word expert I have similar feelings around that, because I don't know if I'll ever be an expert in anything. I think I can learn a lot about things, know a lot about things, but I'm committed to continuing that journey of learning throughout. So that's what I want to share with you today. I used to think that being supportive was finding solutions and fixing suffering. I would take responsibility for other people's problems. And sometimes I would even try to manage their emotions for them. People would see me as very controlling. They might still see that. I'm still working on it. This is a relatively new thing for me. And I didn't realize that trying to repair people's situations was actually getting in the way of connection and intimacy. And if you can relate to any of this, feel free to put in chat at any point, anything I say that you've experienced, or if you've had a different experience with it, put it in there because I'm going to be reading it as I go on. For example, all these wonderful comments about books, and also Kevin agreeing, the excuse busy. I agree. We can find different language to talk about how we're feeling and what we're going through. And that really ties into the supportive experience too. Now, once I switched my approach to support, I was better able to tune into my friends' needs and do that in the present moment. And again, this is new. It's a work in progress. So I could even say once I started switching, I am able right now, better able to tune into people's needs. I even see this in professional contexts. This has made a massive difference in my life as a well-being coach, very much so. I recently went through a training as a coach, and even my work as a podcast host. For example, I stepped away from the role of the expert, as I was saying, and even the role of the people pleaser, and leaned into my natural curiosity about people. So it wasn't, hey, I know everything, or hey, I want to please you. It's now, I want to learn more about you. Can we learn together? I also started asking more questions and have been working on not thinking about my response as I ask a question, as I listen to somebody. This takes a ton of practice, but it continuously pays off. I started to allow my coaching clients to be the experts on themselves. This is something I learned when I went through training. It was a huge aha moment for me when my teacher said, like, your role as a coach is not to be the expert. It's to actually allow them to be the experts on themselves. And for them to tell me what support they need, just like throughout this entire presentation, I want to learn about you. I want to know what support you need. And I will continue to, in real time, adjust some of the things and how I do that. It takes work. And I also placed podcast guests in the spotlight, not trying to dominate the podcast or always have the right response to something a guest would say. I'm there to learn from what they share. And that includes Coach Lee. That's actually the whole reason I'm here today, is because I met Coach Lee. And I'm so glad that I was invited to speak on support, because my word of the year is connection. Do any of you have a word of the year? You can drop that in the chat. Connection is such a powerful word. And as I'm going to share with you later on, it's a key word in my definition of support. Ooh, Tamara said, mine is acceptance. Randy's is compassion. I see reciprocity. Ooh, that's such a good word. Powerful. And it wasn't even very intentional for me. Sometimes words just come to us. I didn't sit down and like try to figure out what my word of the year was. It just kind of came to me, fortunately, at the beginning of the year. And I keep coming back around to that in what I do personally and professionally. So before I get into this more definition of support and some tools, I have a few questions for you. So this is where the interactive part begins. So if you haven't yet had an opportunity to get something to write down some notes and some thoughts, I'm going to turn up the music a little bit, ask you these questions, give you about 30 seconds each to write down bullet points or phrases, whatever you want, and then you'll have the opportunity to share in the chat too. You can skip writing them in the journal and just put them on the chat, or you can start in the journal and not share it all, whatever flow works for you. So here's the first question. What support feels good for you to receive? I'm really glad that I'm going towards the end of I'm at the very end of the conference, because you've had a lot of time to reflect on things. And I don't know how much you've thought about support, but take about 30 seconds right now to think and or write down What support feels good to receive? How's my audio doing? Is it coming through nice and clearly? I think because I don't have my headphones. Actually, I'm going to put my headphones on.
It's perfect.
It's perfect? Okay, good. I'm very, as a podcaster, I suppose, very concerned about audio all the time. If it's perfect, I won't change anything. So I saw some responses to this. Non-judgment feels amazing. Physically showing up, time is priceless. Thank you for the comment on the background music too. Being understood, even if it takes a conversation to be understood. As a listening ear, someone who will listen, reflect, and empathize, or in a different scenario, tangible support that I've asked for, like cleaning the kitchen, an acknowledgement, interest in me as a person. Oh, these are such touching things to read. Thank you so much for sharing. Does it feel good to write it out, but also to hear what other people are saying and read it? I think that can just be incredibly supportive. You're supporting one another right now, and you're supporting me too. There's so much support happening in this very moment. Okay, the next question. Another 30 seconds. What support feels good to give to others? Is it the same support that you like to receive? Is it different? Is there anything that you would add to what feels good about support? It's about 30 seconds to reflect on that and write it down. Okay, we have some answers coming in about what feels good to give. See, being included, invited to events, that could have been a receive or a give. Safety. Ooh, I love that word. Letting them know they matter, listening. Showing up for others, having a high level of integrity so people know they can rely on you. Your actions always follow your words. Ooh, there's lots of positive responses to that one. I love to be a listening ear, to provide a safe place for people to be who they are and share their heart without fear of judgment or fixing. Yes, and I love to give hugs. Making something unexpected possibly for a person. Oh, that's so sweet. Yes. That would feel really good to me because, if you're not expecting something, it feels so magical to receive it, isn't it? Okay, so at any point, if you think of more things to add, you can write it in the chat. And you may be thinking about things throughout, so feel free to anytime add more, change your response. So one more question for you. What, quote, support doesn't feel like support? Are there things that people do or say and they claim it to be supportive, but it doesn't feel like support to you? And maybe even, have you ever tried to give support to people and realized, wait a second, that didn't feel very good? Ooh, even just sharing that out loud makes my chest tighten up a little bit. So I'm gonna give you another 30 seconds to reflect on this and to add in the chat. Already some great responses coming in. Okay, so some responses include telling me what I need to feel better, tough love, fixing doesn't always feel like support. It does not feel like support to me when they jump straight to telling me what I, quote, should do. Yeah. Sometimes these questions give us an opportunity to really dive deep into something and recognize, wow, have I ever even thought about this before? What doesn't feel good? What does feel good? A few more responses came in. Not being actually heard, feeling, quote, handled or coddled. Yeah. If you're feeling any tightness in your chest too, a reminder to breathe and to release anything that is coming up for you physically. You can shake out your body a little bit, move around if you haven't stood up in a little while, or moved your wrist or your feet or your neck, just shaking it out and taking some deep breaths. Because some of this can be triggering, can bring up bad memories. I actually felt bad memories coming up for me, as well as good memories, as I'll share with you some examples later as I was working on this. It can really bring up a lot, so don't forget to release it. And let's move into what makes a supportive friendship. And so many of the responses I've been seeing in the chat are part of my personal definitions, the research I've come across. So many of you are already making such incredible progress in being supportive. And I'm going to be sharing this mostly from the lens of what you can do for others, but also keep that in mind. What feels good to receive? We're going to focus on that later, but some of these things may be reminders of what you want to receive as much as you want to give. So here's the definition that I came up with. Being supportive means showing up for those that matter most to us, to connect with empathy on a continual basis. How does that feel? Is that in alignment with what you view support as, or do you have a different definition? Feel free to put that in the chat. Ted said, knowing my friend will answer if I need to talk sometime. Yeah. That's showing up. And some of these words are kind of a combination of things that I was reading about. So I remember reading somewhere, I don't remember the exact source of that phrase, those that matter most to us, just like Kevin's emphasizing. That really spoke to me, because you don't have to show up for everybody. You can just show up for yourself plus those that matter most. That's where you can spend your time, your capacity, your energy. And you're connecting that with them with empathy, which I've learned is a little bit different from compassion. And you're doing that on a continual basis. You're being consistent with it. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Some examples. Standing beside each other, literally or figuratively. Being purposeful, genuine, and intentional. Being nourishing and nurturing. Filling one another's cups, a collective replenishment. I'm really feeling that from this 3-day conference. The collective replenishment feels really strong in this group. It's beautiful to witness. Creating refuge for each other. Finding our common humanity. And if there's anything you would add to this, put it in the chat. And we're going to move into how to demonstrate support. Just some examples. And many of them I've already seen in the chat. And I put them in different categories to help us think through these things. The first category is to accept and include. And this kind of goes in order too. I saw this earlier from somebody in the chat, which was to convey emotional safety. I think, was it you, Kevin, that said safety? No, Randy said that. Yeah. Emotional safety, psychological safety, conveying that to people, honoring who they are and what their situation is, showing them respect, finding that commonality I mentioned before, releasing expectations, A big one I learned about recently in a book that's in the resource section, I'll share with you later, is to stay neutral and unattached. Don't make assumptions. I heard this come up at least once in a previous session. Giving permission for people to be raw and human, and encouraging self-expression. So taking a look at this list, and if there are any words that come up for you that you want to give more, write them down. And if there are words or phrases that you want to receive more, write them down too. Take a note. Which of these could you use more of in your life? You don't have to understand someone's perspective to respect that is valid. You don't have to be comfortable with someone's perspective to treat them with respect. This is a quote I found somewhere, and I have not yet found the source. Amongst all my reading and research, I lost the source of this, but I thought this was so good. Because we can respect people that we don't understand. We can treat people with respect, even if we're not fully comfortable with them. That's a big practice. That, to me, is a huge part of being supportive. Another element of support is holding space even when it's uncomfortable, tying into that quote. So how can you hold space? You can listen without judgment. Again, that's a practice, and it might not be perfect. You might feel that judgment, but you can practice it. You can inquire with curiosity and wonder, asking questions, just like I'm asking you questions. How can you be more curious? Celebrating people, cheering them on with awe. Just being in complete awe of who they are as human beings and what's going on in their lives. How good does that feel? To me, when I read that sentence, that feels amazing. Just thinking about cheering other people on and receiving that from others. Being celebrated feels so good to me. Affirming people. I'm a big fan of validation. I love to be affirmed. I love to be told I'm doing a good job. I love to receive compliments, feedback, positive feedback. Checking in on people and investing your time, energy, and heart. I saw something along those lines in the chat section too. Because our time is precious. I noticed this in the first day that a lot of people struggle with how much time it takes to show up as a friend. So when you invest your time into somebody, that's an amazing way to hold space for them. And I want to take a moment, since Coach Lee said that he likes positive feedback too. Coach Lee, I've been meaning to give you so much positive feedback from today. Oh my gosh, you're doing an incredible job. I wish I had that button to give you the round of applause, but I'm really amazed. And I think it's Tay, right? Tay is your name. Thank you so much. And pronunciation is what I meant. For being here and letting us know that you're leaving. All right. The next section of being supportive is trust. Taking people at their word. Don't project or force an opinion on them, and avoid playing the devil's advocate. A lot of us are conditioned into this. A lot of us have habits. When I was writing this, I was thinking about a time that I was going through something really hard and really sensitive, something new territory for me, new human experience. And I really leaned on some friends for that situation, but I was afraid that they wouldn't trust me. I was afraid that people were not only going to judge me, but might not believe me based on the situation I went through, which was quite traumatic. I wanted to just share it and feel trusted. I wanted them to take me at my word. I didn't want their opinions. Certainly didn't want them to be the devil's advocate. So the best way that a friend could be supportive was a collective of all these things we're talking about, but the trust was a huge part of this. to really thinking that through. And it can be a knee-jerk reaction. Again, it's often part of our conditioning. So we can continue to practice this when we have the opportunity. And the final section of support I want to cover is to share, exchange, and collaborate. Again, this is something I'm witnessing right now in real time in the chat. You can participate in deep conversations with people. You can stay present and fluid in those conversations and take it slow. Speaking of time, many of us rush through our exchanges. We put time limits on how long we spend with people. We try to fit everything into a quote busy day. There's that word again. What if you could take it slow and give people that present of being present? We can learn from each other and be mindful about that too. What can I learn from you? If we go in with that question, that is in itself a form of support. People love to teach us things. So we're giving them the opportunity to share and teach us. Especially if they're different from us. What can we learn from them? We can be vulnerable, courageous, and brave, and we can remain open-minded. And Kevin said in the chat that he often sees / approaches from another side of perspective, the devil's advocate. I solve a lot of problems this way, but I also make people feel less than, and that's not my goal. And that is nice self-awareness. And I too have fallen into that. I think a lot of us do. I don't know where this comes from in our society, but it's a very common way of showing up. Just like I said before, I like to find solutions. And maybe in my head, I thought, I'll play the devil's advocate because maybe that's what they need right now. Kevin said, oh, I can tell you where this comes from. The awareness is huge. April said, I understand this. I have to be careful as well. It's part of how I process. Yeah. And sometimes it's a very innocent thing. The way our brains work can be different from one another. We have preferences. We don't want people to feel less than. This is why I asked that question before. What support doesn't feel supportive? Checking in on ourselves as we show up and how other people show up for us. Sometimes it takes someone else being a devil's advocate for us to realize, ooh, I didn't like that. So do I want to do that for others? If it didn't feel good to me, will it feel good for them? And the answer might not always be no. Right? Sometimes people actually will want you to be the devil's advocate. And that's going to play a role in something I'll get to in a little bit. Another quote for you. It's not about what someone can do for you. It's who and what the two of you become in each other's presence. This is another quote. I tried really hard to find the first name of this person. Their last name is Sharp. That's all I had written down. It was in an article from the New York Times in 2016. But because of how the New York Times, what's the word, like shows up on Google, the search does, I learned this kind of side note fact that it's really hard to search for sources sometimes because of how some articles show up on Google. So I could not find this full name of this person, but I felt like it was a really, really great quote. And for me, honoring the source is really important. That's part of how I be supportive. Like, these are not my words. This is somebody else's. If anyone finds the source, please let me know. So what does support convey? You can think about it in kind of these 5 phrases. You're witnessing somebody. Essentially, you're saying, I see you. You're conveying a sense of belonging. You're telling them you belong here. You're accepting them. You are welcome here. You're letting them know that they have value, that they matter. You matter to me. And you're offering up that companionship, essentially saying, you do not have to do this alone. How does it feel to read those words? Maybe check in with yourself. Does it feel good if someone were to say these things to you? Has someone ever said these things to you? Have you heard them? Have you said them? Sometimes literally saying these words to people can be one of the best ways to support. It does feel really good. And Ted said, I'm starting to think more in terms of good for me, good for her, good for him, etc., instead of good and bad. Yeah. We all really want to be seen, heard, and appreciated and understood too. I try not to use the word all too much. I don't like to generalize, but I feel like this is a pretty general human experience. Seen, heard, appreciated, and understood. And a quote to back that up. The thing that most people want is to be listened to, not just tolerated. Ooh, this is one for me. I felt a lot of times in my life that I was just being tolerated. Anyone else? Doesn't feel good. Not for me, at least. We want people to care about us and think we're interesting and special. I left out the word all because maybe these words don't pertain to you. Maybe you have a synonym or something else. So let me know in the chat. What do you want people to feel about you? How do you want to be treated? I recommend placing people in the expert chair, just like I said before, how I pivoted from trying to fix, repair, offer solutions, please people all the time. What if I put them in the expert chair? And how can we do that? Well, we can give support instead of offering solutions. We can listen. We can ask if they want our advice before we provide it. We can get their permission before asking hard questions. Coach Lee, I think this happened with you and me when you were on my show. I remember how poignant it was. My podcast is called This Might Get Uncomfortable. And at one point, Coach Lee said, this question is uncomfortable, but I'm going to answer it. It was beautiful. I was so grateful for that. I mean, I get permission from guests before they come on my show, but I also try to disclose there are times I might ask something, you do not have to answer it. We can do the same thing in our personal lives. We can check in with them. We can ask them things like, what do you need right now? How can I best meet that need? Or how can I try? What would be most helpful to you? We can also fill in the foundation of who they are to get context. This helps a lot with not making assumptions. For instance, we can find out about their personality types. Maybe they like to take quizzes, like the 5 love languages can be really good. We can learn about their circumstances, their finances, their relationships, the environment that they live in, etc. Like, what is their life like right now? We can learn about their mental health if they're comfortable sharing that. Some people, I think it was Tay, right, who leads a lot with trauma, just disclosing that. I went through trauma recently. My history has trauma. This defined me. This is part of me. And we can learn about their family history and background. Again, only if they give you permission, only if they say that they're comfortable talking about these things, but you can ask them with an open mind and an open heart. And that way you can show up giving custom support. That puts them in the expert chair. In times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to just be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers. That's from Mr. Rogers. Any Mr. Rogers fans? I love that last part. Our questions are just as important as our answers. A big question asker. And maybe just asking is enough. Somebody might not even be ready to answer you, but your question could be meaningful to them. That could be supportive. Randy said that they dressed up as Halloween one time. I love that. I would like to see a picture of that if you want to share, Randy. Now let's talk about receiving support. It's really easy for me as Whitney, but you might relate to the statement. It's really easy for me to give support, but very hard for me to receive it. Big time for me. This was like the hardest part of putting together this presentation. I think I'm a little too independent. I often think I can handle everything on my own. Sometimes I don't want to be a burden, or I'm afraid people won't be able to support me in the ways that I need. And I bring this to therapy. Recently, something I've talked a lot about with my therapist, and he said that this is likely a combination of the messages I learned as a child, our childhood experiences, what we're taught from our parents, from our caretakers, from our people at school, from our friends, like all these messages. And I'm also neurodivergent. And being neurodivergent is a whole different experience because you're literally thinking different. It's part of the definition of neurodivergence is your brain works differently. And a lot of neurodivergent people, for example, people that are autistic, have ADHD, all different forms of neurodivergence, struggle with things like this because we're taught to hold ourselves back and to change ourselves and become those people pleasers. So support from others can feel really scary, asking for it. But as scary as it is to be needy, I think being needy is part of the human experience. And when you bravely ask for support from others, you're giving them permission for them to do the same. So a few starting points that are a little oversimplified for asking for support is, first and foremost, getting clear on what you need. And that could be going through these 5 questions. When do you need support? Where do you need support? How do you need support? Why do you need support? And who do you need support from? Yourself, someone specific, anyone, really filling in some of these blanks. And when you're clear on that, then you can ask for what you need. You can clearly communicate your feelings, your perspectives, and your values to people. And perhaps you can feel more open to being vulnerable and finding that courage to drop the mask that many of us wear when we're trying to be seen as strong. We're trying not to be needy. Again, a word that's come up a lot today is practice. It's not always going to come out perfectly. Maybe it will never be perfect, but we can practice it. And you are doing that throughout this conference. To form meaningful connections with others, we must first connect with ourselves. It's from the lovely Brene Brown. And Randy J. Patterson, who sounds kind of like the Randy we have in here, similar first name, last initial. Extinguishing the self is not an option. It leads to greater fear, more helplessness, sharper resentment, and deeper depression. So in other words, perhaps being needy is the way that you minimize fear, get more help, reduce or extinguish resentment, and hopefully reduce, treat, heal in your own way depression as best you can if they're connected. How can you get more in touch with yourself and connect, just like my word of the year? So one last thing before we wrap up in a few minutes is we're going to do a friendship audit. Has anyone ever done this? Did this come up? I didn't watch all of the sessions. Did this come up at all in previous sessions, doing a friendship audit? I was surprised when I looked up that phrase. There's not a lot of information on this online. So it must not be a very common thing, but wow, this was helpful for me. I wanted to think about my friendships. I wanted to get clarity. I wanted a visual of all my close friends and other people, important people in my life. And this was transformative to me. You won't believe what happened. I did this audit that we're about to go through, which involves writing down a list of people in your life. And within, I think, an hour of me doing this, I heard from somebody I haven't talked to in about 6 months or so, someone I don't feel very close to yet, but I want to feel closer to. They reached out to me out of the blue. I got to experience support from all sorts of people. Another person yesterday, as I was working on this presentation, invited me to have a connected video chat. We haven't talked in a very long time, a deep conversation, probably over a year. Another friend of mine asked me to support her directly by going to a memorial service with her. And I had a family member reach out to me to share some sad news about her father's health condition. All of these people, it was like they came out of the woodwork and they were asking me for support. And some of them were also offering their support to me. That was the power of this audit for me. I'm not promising that you'll get the same results, but there's potential that I did not expect. So let's spend a few minutes on here. Maybe 2 minutes since we're getting close to time. And you can work on this later. So this is a starting point. I'd love for you to write down privately. It's not something to share in the chat, or start thinking about, or add it to your list to do later. Write down a list of your loved ones. There's this terminology called Dunbar's number. And the philosophy is that you can have up to 5 loved ones in your life. It doesn't mean it'll be the number for you, but that's the general consensus, I guess. And then write a list of your good friends. Generally, this is up to 15 people in your life who you consider good friends, close friends. And once you've compiled the list of loved ones and the list of good friends, you can just write other friends that might not feel as close, might not feel like good friends, great friends, but just other people in your life. So I'd love for you to spend, let's say, a minute right now working on this list, just starting it off. See who comes to mind. By the way, this is a quality, not a quantity exercise. It's not about how many people are in your life. In fact, you can kind of think this through and do a little evaluation as you're working on this. Is when you're thinking of these people in your life, how does it feel when you interact with them? Is it easy to give and receive support? That might help you decide, are they a loved one? Are they good friends? Are they even on the friend list at all? Maybe you want to take them off. Is there anyone there that no longer feels like a fit in your life? This came up in the chat earlier. Who would you contact first if you needed urgent support? Who would be there in a heartbeat for you? Randy asked about the final group. So 3 groups, 3 categories. Your loved ones, which can be up to 5 people if you want to limit. Your good friends could be up to 15 people in your life. And other friends, which could be up to 50. If you're fortunate to have 50 people in your life, that's amazing. I didn't get that far. I don't think I filled out any of these lists yet. I still have work to do. And doing an evaluation of them now or later. Final question to evaluate is, do you want or need new friends, or do you want to focus on the people on this list? Maybe you're here for the last few days because you feel like you need new friends, or maybe you're here to show up as a better friend to those people on that list. So the friendship audit is just an opportunity for you to get clearer on who's important to you, what gaps you might want to fill in. What do you want to shift in your life? You can continue to work on this, but I'm going to start to wrap up today, so we have some time for questions, anything else that might come back up. My final quote for you is to, above all, show your love, show up, say something, do something, be willing to stand beside the gaping hole that has opened in your friend's life without flinching or turning away. Be willing to not have any answers. Listen, be there, be present, be a friend, be love. Love is a thing that lasts. And that quote came from Megan Devine, who is on my resource list that I'm going to share with you next. Powerful book about grief. And so this quote was mostly around how to be supportive of somebody who's going through grief. So here's the resource list. There's a lot here. The Art of Showing Up is one of my top favorite resources for working through a lot of the things related to support for yourself and others. We Need to Talk. It's great for learning how to have conversations that matter. The book that I just mentioned is called It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand. That book was transformative for me. I try to reread it often to learn about grief and loss. And there's a few others here about conversations, showing up for family, friendship, and community, learning to be more assertive so you can express yourself, stand up for yourself, personally and professionally. Radical belonging, so really considering all the different forms of an unjust world that we live in. And even a book about politics and religion really opened my mind up to be less righteous. Considering, again, like I said before, that sometimes being supportive doesn't mean that you're agreeing with somebody, but you're just there for them. A lot of these books touch upon this. And yeah, if you haven't taken a picture yet, you can. If you, there'll be copies of this, I believe, right, Coach Lee, that there'll be a recording of this. And if anyone needs it, they can reach out to me and I can give them a copy of my slides. And last but not least, speaking of being in touch, everyone here is welcome into this private community I created of supportive people. There's actually 2 people, last I checked, I think they're still here, in the chat that are part of this private community I created called Beyond Measure. Everyone here is welcome to join. And I'm gifting any new members a free month of group well-being coaching. So every week I offer a 1-hour group well-being coaching session where you can really dive into all different elements of your health, mental health, physical wellness, whatever makes you feel well. And I'll put that link to this. I'd love to have you in there. You don't have to do the coaching with me. You can just come into the private community that we have and chat, get to know people, learn from each other, practice all the things that I talked about today. So I'll put that link in for you. Oh, perfect. Coach Lee already put that in there. Love it. So please redeem this by March 1st. I want to give you a few weeks just in case you're watching the recording later. It's really designed to be safe and supportive and create true connections. And I know I'm a few minutes over time, so I'm going to stop my screen sharing and show up for any other questions, thoughts, feelings that didn't come up in the chat already.